There's something nobody will tell you honestly about education. The most formidable minds in any field, the people who see what others miss, who connect ideas that nobody else thought to connect, who work problems through to conclusions that surprise even the experts. Almost none of them got that way through formal education. They got that way because at some point they stopped waiting for someone to teach them and started taking complete responsibility for their own understanding. Not by reading more, not by taking more courses, by learning differently, by going deeper than any school would ever ask them to go. The Japanese have a word for what these people become. Not educated, dangerously self-educated, dangerous not because they are harmful, because they have developed a depth of understanding that credentialed but shallow thinkers can never match. They cannot be easily misled, they cannot be impressed by status. They have seen too clearly that credentials and real understanding are very often different things. This video is the complete plan for building that kind of mind. 4 principles from Japanese philosophy and the long tradition of mastery. Each one targeting a specific way that modern self-education fails. Together they form a system that produces something formal education almost never does. A mind shaped by the depth of its own thinking. Subscribe and let's begin. The story behind the principles. Edo period, Japan. A young scholar named Kao has been studying under a master calligrapher for 2 years. He arrives every morning, copies the master's work, reads the texts the master assigns, and attends every session without fail. By every external measure, he is a diligent student. One afternoon, the master stops him mid-practice. Copy this character, the master says, pointing to a single brush stroke on the page. Kao copies it cleanly, precisely. It looks nearly identical to the original. The master shakes his head. You copied the shape, you did not understand the character. Kao does not know what the difference means. The master sits. Tell me what this character means, not the definition, what it means, where it comes from, what it touches in the language, what a person feels when they read it. 2. Kao cannot answer. He has copied the character hundreds of times and does not know any of this. The master is not angry. He has seen this before many times. You have been consuming my teaching. He says you have not been understanding it. These are completely different activities, and until you understand the difference, everything you copy will be a surface without depth. He closes the book. Come back tomorrow, but tonight, instead of practicing, sit with one character. 1. Spend the entire evening with it, not copying, understanding. Kao goes home. He sits with the character for 4 hours. By the end of the night, he understands something he had not understood in 2 years of practice. What the master had been showing him was not technique. It was a way of relating to knowledge itself. This is where the 4 principles begin. Principle 1, Rai, understanding more than reading. Kao's problem had a name in the Japanese tradition of learning. He was consuming without achieving Rikai. Rai means understanding, but not in the ordinary sense of having read something and retained it. In the Japanese tradition of deep study, Rikai means to grasp something so thoroughly that it has become part of you, that you could reconstruct it from nothing. That you could explain it to someone who knows nothing about the subject. That you can see it from multiple angles and understand where it connects to other things and where it does not. This is fundamentally different from reading. Most people who attempt to educate themselves do so by consuming as much as possible. Books, articles, videos, podcasts, the volume is impressive. The understanding is shallow because the act of passing information through your eyes or ears is not the same as learning it. It never was. Think about how many books you have read in the last 2 years that you could not summarize clearly today. Not the title, the actual argument, the specific ideas that made it worth reading. For most people, the honest answer is almost none of them. This is not a memory problem. It is a method problem. The material was consumed rather than understood. It passed through without leaving a real mark, and the reason is simple. Understanding requires friction. It requires the mind to work on material rather than simply receive it. The shift from reading to Rikai requires one thing above everything else: slowness. Instead of finishing a chapter, you spend an afternoon on 3 pages. You break the ideas into smaller and smaller pieces until each one is fully clear. You close the book after a passage and try to reconstruct what you just read from memory. Not word for word, the structure of it, the actual idea, what the author was trying to say, and why they thought it was worth saying. Then you test yourself with the simplest possible question. Can I explain this to someone who knows nothing about this subject, not using the technical language of the text in plain words without the scaffolding of the original phrasing? If you cannot, you do not yet understand it, you only recognize it, and recognition is not understanding. Kao discovered this the night he sat with one character. He had been recognizing characters for 2 years. That night he understood one, the difference was everything. The dangerously self-educated person reads less than most people around them and understands far more because every piece of material has been genuinely absorbed rather than merely passed through the practice. Choose one thing you are currently studying, a book, a concept, a skill. Take the next session and cut your pace in half. When you finish a section, close the material. Write down the core idea in your own words without looking. Simple words, no jargon from the text. Then ask, could I explain this to someone intelligent who knows nothing about this? If the answer is no, go back, not to reread, to understand. One afternoon of this will show you the gap between what you thought you knew and what you actually know. Most people find the gap is larger than they expected. That gap is where the real education begins. Principle 2, Ichigei hairu, the power of one domain. 2 months after the night with the character, Kao is different. He moves through the master's lessons more slowly. He asks different questions. Not what does this mean, but why does it work this way? And what would change if this element were different? The master notices. One afternoon he asks Kao, what else are you studying? Kao lists several things: history, poetry, philosophy. He has been studying broadly, believing that breadth makes a scholar. The master is quiet for a moment. Stop, he says. Kao does not understand, not forever, for now. There is a principle called Ichigei hairu, to enter deeply into one art. The path to becoming genuinely formidable runs through depth in a single domain before it runs through breadth in many. He looks at Kao. The person who has gone truly deep into one thing has learned something that scattered learners never learn: how knowledge itself is structured. What real understanding feels like from the inside. How to navigate from confusion to clarity in a domain that resists easy understanding. These capacities transfer to everything else you later approach, but they can only be built through depth. He pauses. The person who has studied 20 things shallowly has learned only how to study shallowly. The person who has gone deep into one thing has learned how to learn. This is the principle that most self-education projects violate from the beginning. The instinct is to study broadly, to be well-rounded, to cover everything, and this instinct is not wrong. Breadth matters, but there is a sequence, and most people get the sequence backwards. Breadth built on a foundation of genuine depth in one domain produces something completely different from breadth built on nothing. The deep learner who later reads broadly brings a quality of attention to everything they encounter. They know what real understanding feels like. They can tell the difference between recognizing an idea and genuinely grasping it. They have developed a tolerance for the discomfort of confusion that comes before real clarity. The shallow learner who reads broadly just accumulates more surface. Think about the people you know who are genuinely formidable thinkers, not well read in the sense of having covered many topics. Genuinely formidable, almost all of them have one area where they went so deep that the territory became familiar in a way that changed how they think everywhere else. The depth in one domain did not limit them. It built the instrument that made everything else possible. Choosing your one domain is therefore one of the most important decisions in your self-education. Not a hobby, not something you are mildly interested in, something you can imagine spending years inside without losing interest. Something that connects to the deeper questions you find yourself returning to across your life. Once chosen, everything else becomes secondary, not permanently for long enough to go deep. The practice: write down the 3 subjects you are currently studying or want to study. Now ask honestly which one, if I went truly deep into it over the next 2 years, would most change how I think and most connect to what I actually care about. Choose that one. Protect it with quiet stubbornness. Not loudly, just consistently. When other interesting things arrive, note them, return to them later. For now, go deep into the one, the breadth will come. The depth has to be built first. Principle 3, the thinking document. 6 months in, Kaio has been practicing Rikai with calligraphy for half a year and has narrowed his study to a single domain. He comes to the master with a problem. I understand things when I am studying them, he says, but when I return to them days later, the understanding has faded. Not the facts, the understanding, the sense of how the pieces fit together. The master nods. This is because understanding that lives only in the mind is not yet stable. The mind is not a good container for understanding. It is a good generator of it. You need somewhere to put what you generate. He shows Kaio his own practice. A collection of journals going back 30 years, notes from texts he had read, records of his own thinking, ideas he had developed, questions he had worked through. Observations he had made across decades of study and practice. This is not a record of what I have learned. The master says it is a record of what I have come to think. These are different things. He opens to a page from 20 years earlier. See here, I was wrong about this. I can see it clearly now. But being wrong then in writing allowed me to see the wrongness later, and the seeing is what produced the correction. He looks at Kaio. The mind that thinks only inside itself cannot see its own errors clearly. Writing forces clarity, and clarity reveals gaps, and the gaps are where the real learning happens. This is what modern self-education almost universally misses. Taking notes is a record of what you have read. A thinking document is a record of what you have come to think. These are completely different activities with completely different results. Notes keep the knowledge outside you in the notebook, in the app, in the highlights. You can return to them, but they remain external. They do not change how you think. A thinking document is different. When you write your thoughts down, you are forced to make them clear enough to exist on a page. The vague idea that felt complete while it lived unspoken suddenly shows its gaps when you try to put it into written sentences. You will write something and realize partway through the sentence that you do not actually know what you think. That the clarity you felt while reading was borrowed from the text and evaporated the moment you tried to generate it yourself. This is not a comfortable experience. It is enormously valuable. The moment of discovering you do not yet think clearly about something is the moment the real learning can begin. In Japanese intellectual tradition, writing has long been understood as a form of thinking rather than a record of thinking already completed. The writing does not capture understanding. It produces it. Over time, the thinking document becomes something no reading alone can produce. A living conversation with yourself across months and years. A place where you return to old ideas and revise them when you understand more. A record of how your thinking has developed and where it is currently stuck. The master showed Kaio an entry from 20 years earlier. He had been wrong about something he was confident about. The wrongness was visible on the page, and seeing it clearly had allowed him to correct it in a way that an idea held only in the mind could never be corrected. The dangerously self-educated person writes constantly, not for an audience, for their own thinking, because the writing is the engine of their understanding, not a record of it. The practice: start a document private, not for anyone else to read. After every significant study session, write for 10 minutes not what you read, what you now think, what confused you and why. What you are not yet sure about, what connections you noticed that you had not noticed before. Do not edit for clarity. Write to think. Return to old entries monthly. You will find things you wrote that you now understand differently. Update them. The revision is itself the learning. Over a year, this document will contain more genuine insight than most people accumulate in a decade of reading. Kaito spent years building what the master was showing him. If this is changing how you think about your own learning, like this video, one tap tells the algorithm this matters. Now we continue with the final principle. Principle 4, Jissen knowledge through action. 1 year in, Kaio's understanding of calligraphy has deepened beyond what he could have imagined at the beginning. But the master gives him an assignment that surprises him. Go to the market. Spend 1 month helping a merchant write his correspondence and records. Kaio does not understand. He is a student of calligraphy, not a merchant's assistant. The master explains, you have been understanding calligraphy as a student. You now need to understand it as someone whose understanding has consequences, as someone who will see whether what they know actually works when it meets the world. He pauses. Knowledge that stays inside the school never becomes fully real. It remains a performance of understanding. Jess is what makes it real. The bringing of knowledge into lived practice until the understanding moves from your mind into your hands and your judgment. Cow goes to the market. The first week is humbling. The things he understood perfectly in the controlled environment of the master's studio become difficult when the merchant needs a letter written quickly and clearly for a specific practical purpose. The theory is intact, the application is clumsy. By the fourth week, it is not clumsy. He returns to the master with something new in him, not more information, more understanding, the kind that only comes from knowledge having met real conditions, and having been tested and adjusted and tested again until it held. The master sees it immediately. Now you know calligraphy, he says, before you understood it. These are different things. This is the principle where most self-education projects quietly fail. Years of serious study produce a great deal of theoretical knowledge that never actually enters the person's life. They can speak about ideas. They can follow conversations in their domain. They can recognize the right answers when they see them, but the knowledge remains essentially decorative. It has not been applied. It has not been tested. It has not met the friction of the real world that reveals everything a theory cannot account for. Think of it this way. You can read every book ever written about swimming. You can understand the biomechanics, the technique, the breathing patterns. You can pass a written exam about swimming. Until you get in the water, you cannot swim. Knowledge that has never met real conditions is still theoretical knowledge, and theoretical knowledge fades. It does not embed the way applied knowledge does. The understanding that has been tested and adjusted in actual use becomes part of how you think. The understanding that has only been held in the mind without application gradually weakens and eventually disappears. JSON is the practice of applying everything you learn as quickly as possible to actual situations. If you are studying philosophy, apply its principles to the real decisions you are actually facing, not hypothetical ones, real ones, this week. If you are studying writing, write things that real people will read and pay attention to what they actually understand and misunderstand. If you are studying any skill, find the earliest possible opportunity to use it in conditions that produce real feedback. The feedback from application teaches more than the next month of study without it. Because the feedback is specific to your understanding, it shows you exactly where your theory was incomplete or wrong, and that specificity is more valuable than any general instruction. Cao returned from the merchant's market a different student, not because he had read more, because his understanding had met the world and been adjusted by it. The dangerously self-educated person is recognizable by the visible imprint of their learning on their actual life, because their understanding has flowed through them into the world rather than remaining trapped inside their head. The practice for every significant thing you are currently studying. Write down one way you could apply it to your actual life within the next 2 weeks, not a plan to apply it eventually. A specific action, a specific situation, a specific test of whether what you understand actually works when it meets reality. Then do it. The feedback you receive from that application will teach you more than the next month of study without it. What the dangerously self-educated person becomes. Years later, Kyo is no longer a student. He is someone that other students come to. Not because he has credentials, not because he has read the most books, because something is visible in how he thinks and works that people who have only studied formally do not have. He sees things they miss. He connects ideas across domains in ways that surprise people who have studied those domains longer. He works problems through to conclusions that hold up when tested against real conditions. He is what the master described at the beginning, dangerously self-educated. When you bring the 4 principles together, something specific happens over time. You read less than most people but understand far more. You have one domain where you have gone deeper than almost anyone around you. Your thinking has been sharpened across years of writing it down privately, and your knowledge has entered your actual life rather than staying trapped in your head. That combination produces a quality of mind that formal education almost never creates. You stop needing anyone to tell you what to think. You have developed the capacity to work things through carefully on your own. You are not easily impressed by credentials because you have seen too clearly how often credentials and genuine understanding fail to coincide. And you carry a quiet confidence that does not depend on external validation because you know exactly what you understand and exactly where the edges of your understanding currently lie. The path to this is not fast. There is no shortcut. It requires years of deliberate, slow, deep work with no audience and no one distributing the recognition that formal education provides so freely. But the people who walk this path eventually develop something that ordinary education simply cannot produce. A mind shaped by the depth of its own thinking, not filled with other people's ideas, genuinely shaped. That mind, once built, is one of the most valuable things a person can possess. Kaio's master spent 40 years building his thinking document. Near the end of his life, the depth of his understanding was something that could not have been built any other way. Not through formal study, not through reading alone. Through the patient, daily practice of understanding things deeply, going far into one domain, writing his thinking down, and applying everything he learned to actual work in the world. 4 principles, a lifetime of practice. The path is available to you not by reading more, by understanding differently. Ichigei ni hairu, the thinking document. Just start with the one that reveals the biggest gap between where you are and where you want to be. Close this video and spend 30 minutes with one idea you have been meaning to understand properly for months. Not reading more about it, understanding it deeply until you can explain it simply, until you can see where it connects, until it has become genuinely yours. That 30 minutes will be more valuable than the next 10 hours of ordinary consumption. Comment below what is the one domain you are going deep into. Subscribe to Presence and Purpose for ancient wisdom tested by time and confirmed by science. New video every week. The most important education of your life will happen entirely outside any classroom. In the slow daily practice of understanding things deeply, it has already begun.